Imagine scrubbing marble floors in a tower that touches the sky, while the people who walk above you act like you don't exist. That was Angelica Dickey's life. She was a janitor at Smith Corporate Empire, cleaning up after the powerful, keeping her head down, staying invisible. Most days she was just part of the scenery. Dorothy Smith, the CEO's wife, walked past her like she was nothing more than furniture that needed dusting. So when the invitation arrived, sealed in gold, inviting her to the year's most exclusive gala, Angelica knew something was wrong. This wasn't kindness. It was cruelty wrapped in expensive paper. Dorothy didn't want to include her. She wanted to destroy her in front of everyone who mattered. The plan was simple. Invite the black janitor to a black tie event and watch her become the punchline. But Dorothy made one fatal mistake. She didn't know who Angelica really was. She didn't know about the hidden past, the powerful bloodline, or the dangerous people who still remembered the name Dickey. Because when those ballroom doors opened that night, the woman who walked in wasn't holding a mop. She was wearing power like a second skin. And when the city's most feared Mafia boss dropped to one knee in front of her, Dorothy's cruel joke became her worst nightmare. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get started. Angelica Dickey started her shift at 4 in the morning when the city was still dark, and the Smith Tower stood like a silent monument to money and power. She moved through the building like a shadow, her cart rattling softly as she pushed it down the marble hallways. The executives wouldn't arrive for another 4 hours, which was exactly how they liked it. By the time they stepped off their private elevators, every surface would be spotless, every window clear, every trace of her erased. She had worked here for 3 years, and in that time she had perfected the art of being invisible. It wasn't something she had chosen. It was something that had been decided for her the moment she walked through the service entrance wearing a janitor's uniform. To the people who ran Smith Corporate Empire, she wasn't a person. She was a function, a pair of hands that cleaned, a body that moved silently through their world without disrupting it. Dorothy Smith was the worst of them all, the CEO's wife didn't work in the tower, but she visited often, usually to have lunch with her circle of friends in the executive dining room on the 40th floor. They called themselves the Golden Circle, though Angelica had other names for them. Dorothy treated the tower like her personal kingdom, and she treated Angelica like something she had stepped in. One afternoon, Angelica was cleaning the conference room on the 38th floor when Dorothy and her friends walked in. They were laughing about something, their voices high and sharp like breaking glass. Angelica kept her head down, continuing to wipe the table. "Oh," Dorothy said, her voice dripping with fake surprise. "I didn't realize anyone was still in here." Angelica straightened. "I'm almost finished, Mrs. Smith. I'll be out of your way in just a moment." Dorothy waved her hand dismissively, already turning back to her friends. "Take your time. We don't mind the help." The other women giggled. One of them, a thin blonde named Caroline, leaned in and whispered something that made them all laugh harder. Angelica kept cleaning, her movements steady and mechanical. She had learned a long time ago that reacting only made it worse. "Isn't it amazing?" Dorothy continued, loud enough for Angelica to hear every word. "How some people are just born to serve. It's like they don't even have ambition. They're perfectly content to stay in their little place." Angelica's hand tightened around the cloth, but her face remained neutral. She finished wiping down the table and moved toward the door, pushing her cart ahead of her. "Excuse me," Dorothy called out just as Angelica reached the exit. "You missed a spot." Angelica turned back. The table was spotless. She had just cleaned every inch of it. But Dorothy was pointing to a section near the window, her finger extended like a weapon. "Right there," Dorothy said, her smile sharp. "Can't you see it?" Angelica walked back to the table. She looked at the spot Dorothy was indicating. There was nothing there. She wiped it anyway, her movements slow and deliberate. When she looked up, Dorothy was staring at her with an expression that made Angelica's stomach turn. It wasn't anger. It was amusement. Dorothy was enjoying this. Much better, Dorothy said sweetly. You're so good at your job. The golden circle erupted in laughter as Angelica left the room. She pushed her cart down the hallway, her jaw clenched so tight it hurt. She had been dealing with people like Dorothy her whole life, people who thought cruelty was a game, people who measured their worth by how small they could make others feel. But what Dorothy didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Angelica had once lived in a very different world, a world where her last name meant something, a world where people showed respect not because they wanted to, but because they had to. She had walked away from that world years ago after watching it destroy everyone she loved. She had chosen this life, this invisibility, because it was safe, because it was quiet, because it meant she didn't have to carry the weight of her family's legacy. But as she emptied trash bins and mopped floors, as she endured the daily humiliations and the casual cruelty, a small part of her wondered how long she could keep pretending to be no one. How long she could keep running from the person she used to be. That question would be answered sooner than she thought. Because the next morning, when Angelica arrived at her locker in the basement, there was an envelope waiting for her. Gold-sealed, expensive, and addressed to her in elegant script that seemed to mock everything she had become. Angelica stared at the envelope for a long moment before touching it. The gold seal caught the harsh fluorescent light of the basement locker room, gleaming like a small sun against the dull metal. Her name was written across the front in calligraphy so perfect it looked like art. Miss Angelica Dickey. Not janitor, not cleaning staff, just her name, as if she were someone who mattered. She knew it was wrong. People like her didn't get invitations with gold seals. People like her got work schedules and discipline notices, but her fingers moved anyway, breaking the seal and pulling out the card inside. The Smith Corporate Empire Annual Gala, black tie, grand ballroom of the Sinclair Hotel. This Saturday at 8 o'clock in the evening. Angelica's hands trembled as she read it again. The Sinclair was the most expensive hotel in the city, the kind of place where a single night cost more than she made in a month. The annual gala was legendary, a gathering of everyone who mattered in the corporate world. CEOs, politicians, old money families, and now, apparently, janitors. Well, Angelica turned. Dorothy Smith stood in the doorway of the locker room, her arms crossed, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Behind her, the golden circle filed in like a pack of wolves. Caroline, Jessica, and Amanda, all dressed in designer clothes that probably cost more than Angelica's car. "Did you get my little gift?" Dorothy asked, stepping closer. Her heels clicked against the concrete floor, each step deliberate and slow. Angelica held up the invitation. "This is yours?" "Well, technically it's from the company," Dorothy said, her voice sickeningly sweet. "But I made sure you were on the guest list personally. I told Barrett that we needed to be more inclusive this year, that we needed to show the world that Smith Corporate Empire values all of its employees, no matter how humble their position." The golden circle giggled behind her. Amanda covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes dancing with malicious glee. Angelica looked down at the invitation again. "Why would you do this?" "Why?" Dorothy's smile widened. "Because you work so hard, Angelica. You're always here, always cleaning, always keeping your head down. I thought it was time you got to see how the other half lives. Time you got to experience a real high society event." "You mean you want to humiliate me?" Angelica said quietly. Dorothy's eyes flashed with something cold and sharp. "I mean, I want to give you an opportunity. Most people in your position would never get to walk through those doors. But now you can. You can put on your best dress, whatever that might be, and join us for an evening of elegance and sophistication." Caroline stepped forward, her voice dripping with false concern. "You do have something appropriate to wear, don't you? I mean, black tie is very specific. You can't just show up in anything." "Maybe we should take her shopping," Jessica suggested, and the others erupted in laughter. Angelica felt heat rising in her chest, burning through the careful control she had maintained for 3 years. She wanted to tell them what she thought of their invitation, their gala, their entire shallow world. She wanted to throw the card in Dorothy's face and walk away. But something stopped her. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the small voice in the back of her mind that remembered a time when she was the one people feared to insult. "I'll be there," Angelica said, her voice steady. Dorothy's smile faltered for just a moment, as if she hadn't expected that response. Then it returned, brighter and more vicious than before. "Wonderful. We'll make sure to save you a seat, somewhere visible so everyone can see our commitment to diversity." The golden circle laughed again as they turned to leave, their voices echoing through the basement. Dorothy paused at the door, looking back over her shoulder. "Oh, and Angelica, do try to arrive on time. We wouldn't want you to miss the entrance. That's always the best part of these events. Everyone watching, everyone judging, everyone deciding in an instant whether you belong or not." She left without waiting for a response, her entourage trailing behind her like satellites orbiting a cruel sun. Angelica stood alone in the locker room, the invitation still clutched in her hand. She could hear their laughter fading up the stairs, could imagine them already planning how they would tell the story, how they would describe the look on her face. But what they couldn't imagine, what they couldn't possibly know, was what Angelica was about to do next. Because in her small apartment, hidden in a place no one had looked in years, was a safe. And inside that safe was everything she had tried to forget, everything she had run from, everything she would need to turn Dorothy's trap into her own personal resurrection. Angelica's apartment was small and plain, the kind of place that matched the life she had built for herself. 1 bedroom, a kitchenette, furniture from thrift stores. Everything about it screamed ordinary, forgettable, safe. She had chosen it that way on purpose, stripping away anything that might connect her to who she used to be. She dropped her keys on the counter and stood in the middle of the living room, still holding the gold-sealed invitation. The fluorescent lights hummed above her, casting everything in a harsh, clinical glow. For 3 years, she had lived in this space without thinking about what was hidden beneath the floorboards. For 3 years, she had pretended that part of her life didn't exist. But Dorothy's cruelty had awakened something she thought she had buried forever. Angelica walked to her bedroom and knelt beside the bed. She reached underneath and pulled out a small rug, revealing the old hardwood beneath. Her fingers found the groove between 2 boards, and she pried them up carefully, one by one. Dust rose in the air, dancing in the dim light from the window. The safe was exactly where she had left it 3 years ago. Small, black, unmarked. She had purchased it from a man who specialized in keeping secrets, the kind of man who didn't ask questions and didn't keep records. The combination was a sequence she had sworn she would forget, but her fingers remembered anyway, turning the dial with practiced precision. The lock clicked open. Inside was a velvet bag, heavy and substantial. Angelica lifted it out slowly, as if it might burn her. She hadn't touched this bag since the night she fled, since the night her world collapsed and she decided to become someone else. Her hands shook as she loosened the drawstring and poured the contents onto her bed. A photograph fell out first, old and creased at the edges. It showed a younger Angelica, maybe 19, standing between two men in expensive suits, her father on one side, her uncle on the other. All three of them looked like royalty dressed in black, their expressions serious and commanding. Behind them was the Dickey family estate, a sprawling mansion that had been in her family for 4 generations. Next came the documents. Deeds, contracts, letters sealed with wax. Her father's handwriting covered page after page, detailing agreements with people whose names still carried weight in the underworld. The Dickey family hadn't been criminals in the traditional sense. They had been brokers, mediators, the ones who kept peace between the various factions that ran the city's shadow economy. They had been untouchable because they held everyone's secrets, everyone's debts. Angelica spread the papers across her bed, reading through agreements she had once memorized. The Barrett-Smith contract was near the bottom, dated 7 years ago. Her father had loaned Barrett $2 million to save his failing company, money that came with very specific terms. The debt was to be repaid within 10 years, with interest. If Barrett defaulted, control of Smith corporate empire would transfer to the Dickey family estate. But there was another clause, one that made Angelica's breath catch in her throat. The debt wasn't just owed to her father. It was owed to the Dickey bloodline, which meant that even after her father's death, even after her uncle's murder, the contract was still active. And as the last surviving Dickey, she was the one who held Barrett's fate in her hands. She had forgotten about this. Or maybe she had forced herself to forget, pushing it down into the same dark place where she kept all her other memories. But the contract was real, witnessed and notarized, backed by the kind of enforcement that didn't come from lawyers or courts. At the bottom of the velvet bag was a ring, heavy gold, set with a black diamond. The Dickey family seal was carved into the stone, a symbol that once meant protection, authority, power. Her father had given it to her on her 18th birthday, telling her that one day she would need it, that one day people would need to know who she was. Angelica slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if the last 3 years had never happened. She gathered the documents and returned them to the safe, but she kept the photograph and the ring. Then she reached for her phone and dialed a number she had sworn she would never call again. It rang 3 times before a woman answered, her voice smooth and controlled. "I was wondering when you would contact me," Veronica Moore said. "I need a dress," Angelica replied. "And I need everyone to remember exactly who I am." There was a pause, then a low laugh on the other end of the line. "The Midnight Empress rises. I'll be there in an hour, and Angelica, welcome back." Veronica Moore arrived exactly when she said she would, pulling up to Angelica's building in a black Mercedes that looked out of place among the aging sedans and pickup trucks. She stepped out wearing a tailored pantsuit and carrying 2 large garment bags, moving with the kind of confidence that came from years of dressing the powerful. Angelica met her at the door. They hadn't seen each other in 3 years, but Veronica's eyes held no surprise, no judgment, only recognition. "You look tired," Veronica said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "I've been scrubbing floors for a living." "I know." Veronica set the garment bags on the couch and turned to face her. "I've known where you were the whole time. I just respected your choice to disappear." Angelica felt something twist in her chest. "Then why didn't you reach out?" "Because you weren't ready." Veronica crossed her arms. "But now you are. Otherwise, you wouldn't have called me." She was right. Angelica had spent 3 years running from her past, convincing herself that she could be someone else, someone ordinary. But Dorothy's invitation had shattered that illusion. You couldn't outrun your blood. You couldn't erase your name. And you couldn't let people like Dorothy Smith treat you like nothing when you came from everything. I need to make an entrance, Angelica said. The kind that makes people remember. Veronica smiled, slow and dangerous. I know exactly what you need. She unzipped the first garment bag and pulled out a dress that seemed to absorb the light in the room. It was black, but not simple black. This was the kind of black that held depth, layers, mystery. The fabric shimmered with thousands of tiny crystals that caught the light like stars in a midnight sky. I started designing this the day your father died, Veronica said quietly. I knew that one day you would need it. One day you would stop hiding and reclaim what was yours. Angelica reached out and touched the fabric. It felt like liquid silk, cool and smooth against her fingers. Why would you do that? Veronica's expression shifted, becoming something softer and more vulnerable. Because your father saved my life 20 years ago when I was nobody, when I was just a girl with a sewing machine and a dream. I got involved with the wrong people. I owed money to men who didn't accept excuses. They were going to kill me, Angelica. They were going to make an example of me. She paused, her eyes distant with memory. Your father paid my debt, $200,000 just like that. He didn't ask for anything in return except one thing. He made me swear a blood oath that if you ever needed me, I would be there. That I would use everything I had learned, everything I had become to serve you. Angelica felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Her father had done things like that all the time, helping people, creating networks of loyalty that extended throughout the city. He had built an empire not on fear, but on debts that people wanted to repay. He believed in you, Veronica continued. He always said you were going to be greater than him, stronger, wiser. He said you had his mind but your mother's heart, and that combination would make you unstoppable. He was wrong, Angelica whispered. Look at me. I clean toilets for people who don't even know my name. No, Veronica stepped closer, her voice firm. You survived. After everything that happened, after your father was killed, after your uncle was murdered, after the whole family was torn apart, you survived. That's not weakness, Angelica, that's strength. And now it's time to show them what that strength looks like. She held up the dress and Angelica could see every detail now. The fitted bodice that would hug her curves, the high neckline that spoke of power rather than seduction, the way the crystals were arranged to catch light from every angle. It wasn't just a dress, it was armor. It was a statement. It was everything she had tried to forget, transformed into something she could wear. Try it on, Veronica said. Angelica took the dress and disappeared into her bedroom. When she emerged 5 minutes later, Veronica's breath caught audibly. The dress fit perfectly, as if it had been made for this exact moment. The crystals caught the dim apartment lighting and transformed it into something magical, making Angelica look like she was wearing the night itself. The Midnight Empress, Veronica whispered, just like I always imagined. She walked around Angelica slowly, making minor adjustments, her hands moving with practiced precision. Then she opened her bag and pulled out a small velvet box. There's one more thing, Veronica said, opening the box to reveal a necklace. Black diamonds arranged in a pattern that matched the Dickey family seal. Your father commissioned this before he died. He never got to give it to you. Angelica stared at the necklace, her composure finally cracking. Tears rolled down her cheeks as Veronica fastened it around her neck, the weight of it settling against her skin like a promise. Saturday night, Veronica said softly. You walk into that ballroom and you show them who you really are. You show them that the Dickey family isn't dead. And you make Dorothy Smith regret ever thinking she could humiliate you. Angelica looked at herself in the mirror, seeing not the janitor she had become, but the woman she was meant to be. The woman her father had raised. The the woman who carried a bloodline that commanded respect from the most dangerous people in the city. "There's something else you need to know," Veronica said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Curtis Bowling is in town, and he's been asking about you." Saturday arrived like a storm on the horizon, heavy with promise and danger. Angelica spent the day in silence, preparing herself not just physically but mentally for what was about to happen. She wasn't just going to a gala, she was walking back into a world she had abandoned, and there would be no returning to the shadows once she crossed that threshold. Veronica arrived at 7 to help with final preparations. Hair swept up in an elegant style that exposed Angelica's long neck and the black diamond necklace. Makeup subtle but striking, emphasizing her eyes and the sharp angles of her face. When she slipped into the Midnight Empress dress for the second time, she felt the transformation complete itself. The woman in the mirror wasn't Angelica Dickey the janitor. This was Angelica Dickey, daughter of Marcus Dickey, heir to a legacy that had shaped the city's underworld for generations. "Remember," Veronica said as they stood at the door, "you don't owe them explanations, you don't owe them apologies. You walk in there like you own the room because in many ways you do." Angelica touched the ring on her finger, feeling the weight of the black diamond. "What if Curtis really is there?" "Then he'll do exactly what he's supposed to do," Veronica replied. "The blood oath his family swore to yours doesn't expire just because you've been hiding. He knows who you are. He's always known." The car Veronica had arranged was waiting outside, another black Mercedes with tinted windows. The driver knew better than to make conversation. He simply drove through the city streets as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. Angelica watched the buildings pass, thinking about all the times she had cleaned those glass towers, invisible and forgotten. Not anymore. The Sinclair Hotel rose before them like a cathedral of wealth, its facade illuminated by thousands of lights. A red carpet stretched from the entrance to the street, lined with photographers and onlookers. The city's elite were already arriving, stepping out of limousines and luxury cars, dressed in their finest, ready to see and be seen. "Ready?" the driver asked, pulling up to the carpet. Angelica took a breath. "Ready?" He opened her door and she stepped out into the cool evening air. For a moment, nothing happened. The photographers were focused on a senator and his wife ahead of her. The crowd was murmuring about someone else. Then someone turned and their conversation stopped mid-sentence. Then another person looked, and another. A ripple of silence spread through the crowd like a wave, starting at the street and moving toward the hotel entrance. Angelica walked forward, her heels clicking against the pavement, her dress catching the lights and transforming them into something otherworldly. The crystals sparkled with every step, making her look like she was wrapped in captured starlight. The photographers swung their cameras toward her, flashes exploding in rapid succession. Questions started flying, but she ignored them all, keeping her eyes forward, her expression serene and untouchable. She could feel everyone watching, assessing, trying to figure out who she was and why she commanded attention without saying a word. She reached the entrance and the doorman stepped back automatically, as if some instinct told him she was not someone to be questioned. The massive doors opened, revealing the grand ballroom beyond. The gala was already in full swing. Hundreds of people in evening wear filled the space, champagne glasses in hand, conversations flowing freely. A string quartet played near the back, their music providing an elegant soundtrack to the evening. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls, casting everything in warm, golden light. Angelica stepped inside and the music stopped. It wasn't a gradual silence this time. The violinist's bow froze mid-stroke. The conversations cut off as if someone had pressed a mute button. Every head turned toward the entrance, Every eye locked on the woman in the black dress who stood framed in the doorway like a vision from another world. Dorothy Smith was near the center of the room, surrounded by the golden circle. Her mouth fell open, her champagne glass tilting dangerously in her hand. Caroline grabbed Jessica's arm, her knuckles white. Amanda took a step backward, as if distance might protect her from what she was seeing. But it was Barrett Smith's reaction that Angelica noticed most. The CEO stood near the bar, his face draining of color as recognition hit him. He knew exactly who she was. He had known her father. And judging by the way his hand trembled, bringing his drink to his lips, he had just realized that the debt he thought was buried with Marcus Dickey was standing in his ballroom, very much alive and very much present. Angelica walked forward, her steps measured and deliberate. The crowd parted like water, creating a path directly to where Dorothy stood. She could see the confusion in Dorothy's eyes, the way her brain was working overtime to reconcile the janitor she had mocked with the Empress who now commanded every bit of attention in the room. "Good evening, Dorothy," Angelica said, her voice carrying in the silence. "Thank you for the invitation." Dorothy's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The golden circle stood frozen, their usual confidence shattered by the impossible reality before them. Then the ballroom doors opened again and a cold wind swept through the room. The remaining conversations died completely as a new figure stepped inside. Curtis Bowling, the legendary Mafia boss, flanked by a man who could only be his enforcer. Both wore dark suits, both moved with the kind of lethal grace that made everyone instinctively step back. Curtis's eyes scanned the room until they found Angelica. And then, to the shock of everyone present, his hard expression softened into something that looked almost like relief. Curtis Bowling didn't walk into rooms. He entered them like a force of nature, commanding space and attention without effort. He was in his mid-50s, tall and broad-shouldered, with silver threading through his dark hair and eyes that had seen things most people couldn't imagine. His suit was impeccably tailored, his shoes polished to a mirror shine, but no amount of expensive clothing could hide what he really was. A predator. A king in a world where power wasn't given, it was taken and held with an iron fist. Beside him walked Silas Vane, his right hand an enforcer. Silas was younger, maybe 35, with the kind of build that came from years of violence and discipline. His face was expressionless, his eyes constantly scanning the room for threats. Where Curtis commanded through presence, Silas commanded through the promise of what he could do if you crossed the wrong line. The temperature in the ballroom seemed to drop 10 degrees. The elite who had been so comfortable moments ago suddenly looked like prey animals who had just realized they were in the presence of an apex predator. Men who controlled corporations worth billions shifted nervously. Women who wore jewelry that cost more than houses clutched their champagne glasses tighter. Because money meant nothing to Curtis Bowling. Power meant nothing. The only thing that mattered to him was loyalty and the debts owed to those he protected. Barrett Smith's face had gone from pale to ashen. His hand shook so badly that champagne sloshed over the rim of his glass, staining his expensive tuxedo. He looked like a man who had just seen his execution date moved up by several years. Curtis moved through the crowd and people scrambled to get out of his way. No one wanted to be noticed by him. No one wanted to be remembered. The golden circle practically fell over themselves, backing away as he passed. Their earlier confidence completely evaporated. But Curtis wasn't looking at them. His eyes were locked on Angelica, and as he walked toward her, something extraordinary happened. His hard expression shifted, the dangerous edge softening into something that looked almost like reverence. He stopped 3 feet away from her, and for a moment, the entire ballroom held its breath. "Miss Dickey," Curtis said, his voice rough but respectful. "It's been a long time." Angelica met his gaze steadily. "Mr. Bowling, I wasn't expecting to see you here." I go where I'm needed, he replied. And when I heard that Marcus Dickey's daughter might be making an appearance tonight, I knew exactly where I needed to be. Dorothy found her voice, though it came out higher and thinner than usual. I'm sorry, but who are you? This is a private event. Curtis didn't even glance at her. To acknowledge Dorothy would be to grant her importance, and in his world, she had none. Silas, however, turned his cold gaze toward her, and the look was enough to make her take a step back, nearly tripping over her own feet. Your father saved my life, Curtis said to Angelica, ignoring everything else in the room. 22 years ago, when I was young and stupid and thought I could take on the Castellano family by myself, they had me cornered, ready to put a bullet in my head. Marcus Dickey stepped in, called in favors, negotiated a peace that should have been impossible. He didn't ask for anything in return except my word that if his family ever needed protection, I would provide it. My father made many such arrangements, Angelica said quietly. He did. But this one was different. He saved my life, Miss Dickey. That kind of debt doesn't expire. It passes down through generations. My grandfather swore an oath to your great-grandfather. My father swore one to your grandfather, and I swore one to Marcus. Which means the oath extends to you. Around them, the crowd was beginning to understand that they were witnessing something significant, something that went deeper than business or politics. This was about old loyalties, old debts, the kind of bonds that were written in blood and honor. Barrett Smith looked like he might faint. Beside him, Dorothy was staring at Angelica with an expression that had moved beyond shock into something approaching horror. The woman she had invited as a joke, the janitor she had planned to humiliate, was standing in the center of her gala, receiving deference from one of the most dangerous men in the city. I need to ask you something, Curtis said, his voice dropping lower so only those nearby could hear. Are you back, or is this just one night? Angelica felt the weight of the question. It wasn't just about attending a gala or wearing a dress. Curtis was asking if she was ready to reclaim her family's position, to step back into a world of power and danger and obligation, to become the person her father had trained her to be. Before she could answer, Curtis did something that made the entire ballroom gasp in collective shock. He lowered himself to one knee. His head bowed, one fist pressed against his chest in a gesture of absolute loyalty and respect. On my honor and the honor of the Bowling family, he said, his voice carrying through the stunned silence, I swear my allegiance to Angelica Dickey, rightful heir to the Dickey legacy. Her enemies are my enemies. Her will is my command. This I swear on the blood oath that binds our families. Silas Vane moved to stand beside Curtis and dropped to one knee as well, mirroring his boss's gesture. Two of the most feared men in the city kneeling before a woman most people in the room had never heard of until 5 minutes ago. Dorothy's champagne glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the marble floor, the sound impossibly loud in the silence. Her face had gone completely white, her eyes wide with the dawning realization that she hadn't just invited a janitor to mock. She had invited a queen. And now that queen was looking directly at her with an expression that promised consequences Dorothy couldn't begin to imagine. The silence in the ballroom was absolute, broken only by the sound of Dorothy's shattered champagne glass being ground under someone's nervous foot. Angelica stood perfectly still, looking down at Curtis Bowling and Silas Vane kneeling before her, their heads bowed in submission. Every eye in the room was locked on this impossible scene, trying to process what they were witnessing. Dorothy's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The golden circle had backed away from her as if her social poison might be contagious. Caroline's face had gone pale. Jessica was gripping Amanda's arm so hard her knuckles were white, and Amanda looked like she might be sick all over her designer gown. Angelica let the moment stretch, let everyone absorb what was happening. Then she spoke, her voice calm and measured, carrying to every corner of the ballroom. "Rise, Mr. Bowling. You honor me with your loyalty as your family has honored mine for 3 generations." Curtis stood slowly, Silas following his lead. The Mafia boss's eyes held a question, waiting for her signal, waiting to know how she wanted to handle this situation. He was offering her his power, his influence, his capacity for both protection and destruction. All she had to do was point him in the right direction. But Angelica wasn't her father. She didn't need violence to make her point. She turned to Dorothy, who looked like she wanted to disappear into the marble floor. The CEO's wife was trembling now, her carefully applied makeup starting to run as sweat beaded on her forehead. Behind her, Barrett had moved closer, his hand hovering near his wife's elbow as if he might need to physically support her. "Dorothy," Angelica said softly, taking a step forward. "You wanted to show everyone what a janitor looks like at a high society event. You wanted to prove that some people simply don't belong in certain spaces, that they're beneath you, less than you." Dorothy's voice came out as barely a whisper. "I didn't mean—" "You did mean it," Angelica interrupted, her tone still gentle but edged with steel. "You meant every bit of it. The invitation wasn't kindness. It was cruelty wrapped in gold foil. You wanted to watch me stumble in wearing something inappropriate. You wanted your friends to laugh at how I didn't understand which fork to use or how to dance properly or how to make small talk with people who matter. You wanted to turn me into entertainment." "Please," Dorothy said, and now there were real tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry, I didn't know who you were." "And that's the problem, isn't it?" Angelica took another step closer and Dorothy flinched. "You didn't know who I was, so you assumed I was nobody. You saw a black woman cleaning floors and decided that meant you could treat her however you wanted, that she had no power, no history, no value beyond the services she provided." Around them, the crowd was watching with rapt attention. Some looked ashamed, perhaps recognizing their own behavior in Dorothy's actions. Others looked fascinated, drawn to the spectacle of someone from their own class being taken down. But all of them were listening, absorbing every word. "I could make you pay for that," Angelica continued. "Mr. Bowling here would be happy to explain to your husband exactly how much the Smith family owes mine. Not just in money, though there's plenty of that, but in favors, in debts, in the kind of obligations that don't appear in quarterly reports but that control everything anyway." Barrett made a choking sound. Curtis smiled just slightly, confirming what Angelica had said. "Your entire empire, Dorothy, sits on a foundation that belongs to my family. Your penthouse, your cars, your jewelry, your precious Golden Circle membership. All of it exists because my father gave your husband the money to build it. And he did that because he believed Barrett was an honorable man who would keep his word. Was he right about that, Barrett?" The CEO looked like he aged 10 years in that moment. His shoulders slumped, his face crumpled, and when he spoke, his voice was defeated. "Your father was more than generous. The terms were fair. I thought I had more time. You thought the debt died with him," Angelica finished. "You thought that when Marcus Dickey was killed, when my uncle was murdered, when my family fell apart, that you were free, that you could keep what he built for you without ever having to acknowledge where it came from." She turned back to Dorothy, whose tears were flowing freely now, mascara running down her cheeks in black rivers. "But here's what you didn't understand, Dorothy. You can't kill a legacy. You can't erase a bloodline, and you certainly can't humiliate someone whose name still commands respect from the people who really run this city." Curtis stepped forward, positioning himself slightly behind Angelica's right shoulder. The message was clear. She had his support, his protection, his power. So here's what's going to happen, Angelica said, her voice dropping to something almost intimate, forcing Dorothy and everyone else to lean in to hear. You're going to announce to everyone here exactly who I am. You're going to tell them why you really invited me. And then you're going to apologize, not because I'm forcing you to, but because it's the right thing to do. And Dorothy? She leaned in closer, close enough that only Dorothy could hear her final words. If you ever treat another human being the way you've treated me, if you ever use your privilege to hurt someone you think is beneath you, I will call in every debt your family owes mine. I will take everything Barrett built and redistribute it to the people who actually deserve it. Do you understand me? Dorothy nodded frantically, unable to speak. Angelica straightened and turned to face the crowd. Her dress caught the chandelier light, transforming her into something mythical, something powerful and untouchable. Now, she said clearly, I believe someone has an announcement to make. But before Dorothy could open her mouth, the ballroom doors burst open again. A man in a crisp suit rushed in, his face flushed with urgency, heading straight for Barrett Smith. He leaned in and whispered something in the CEO's ear, and Barrett's expression shifted from defeat to absolute terror. What is it? Angelica asked, her instincts telling her that whatever news had just arrived was going to change everything. Barrett looked at her, then at Curtis, then back at her. When he spoke, his voice cracked with fear. The federal prosecutors, they're outside. They have warrants for my arrest. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Guests pulled out their phones, the sound of camera shutters clicking filled the air, and urgent whispers spread through the crowd like wildfire. Federal prosecutors at a society gala meant scandal, and scandal meant opportunity for some and ruin for others. Barrett stood frozen, his face the color of old paper. Dorothy grabbed his arm, her earlier tears forgotten in the face of this new disaster. The golden circle scattered like roaches when the lights came on, suddenly very interested in being anywhere else. Curtis moved to Angelica's side, his voice low. Did you know about this? No, she replied, watching Barrett with a mixture of curiosity and calculation. But I'm very interested in finding out what he's done. The man who had delivered the news was still hovering nearby, wringing his hands. Mr. Smith, they're waiting in the lobby. They said they'd give you 5 minutes to come voluntarily before they come in here. 5 minutes? Barrett repeated numbly. Then his eyes focused on Angelica with desperate intensity. You can fix this. Your family has connections, the kind of connections that can make things like this disappear. Can they? Angelica asked calmly. Your father did it for me before, Barrett said, his voice rising with panic. 10 years ago, when the SEC was investigating irregular trading patterns. Marcus made it go away. He knew people, had leverage. He saved me then, and I've been paying him ever since. Curtis's expression darkened. Is that what you think the arrangement was? Protection money? Wasn't it? Barrett shot back, desperation making him bold. No, Curtis said flatly. Your arrangement with Marcus Dickey was a loan, Barrett. $2 million to save your company when you were 3 weeks from bankruptcy. The terms were clear. 10 years to repay with reasonable interest and certain behavioral expectations during that time. Behavioral expectations? Angelica asked, turning to Curtis. The Mafia boss nodded. Your father didn't just loan money, Miss Dickey. He invested in people he thought had potential. But his investments came with conditions. No illegal activity, no exploitation of workers, no dirty dealings that would bring federal attention. He believed that real power came from building legitimate empires, not criminal ones. He turned his cold gaze back to Barrett. So let me ask you something. What did you do to bring federal prosecutors to your door? Barrett's silence was answer enough. Silas Vane stepped forward, pulling out his phone. His fingers moved quickly across the screen, and after a moment he held it up for Curtis to see. The Mafia boss's jaw tightened as he read whatever was displayed. "Insider trading," Curtis said quietly. "Securities fraud, money laundering. You've been running a scheme for the last 3 years, Barrett, using your company to wash money for offshore accounts, manipulating stock prices, stealing from your own investors." The crowd, which had been pretending not to listen while hanging on every word, gasped collectively. This was bigger than a simple arrest. This was the kind of scandal that destroyed empires and sent people to prison for decades. "I didn't have a choice," Barrett said, his voice breaking. "The market changed. The competition got fiercer. I needed capital to expand, and the banks wouldn't lend. So I found other sources." "You mean you got greedy?" Angelica said softly. "You had everything my father gave you, a second chance, a thriving company, a future, but it wasn't enough. You wanted more, and you didn't care who got hurt in the process." "Please," Barrett begged, dropping to his knees in front of her. The image was almost comical, the powerful CEO kneeling in the same spot where Curtis had knelt minutes earlier, but for entirely different reasons. "I'll do anything. I'll sign over the company. I'll give you everything. Just help me." Angelica looked down at him, feeling nothing but contempt. This was the man her father had believed in, had invested in, had trusted to be better, and he had thrown it all away for greed. "The debt you owe my family is $7 million, she said clearly, making sure everyone could hear. Principal plus interest accumulated over 10 years. In addition, there are the contractual penalties for violating the behavioral clauses, which triple the amount owed. That brings your total debt to $21 million. Barrett's face went slack with shock. "However," Angelica continued, "the contract also includes a seizure clause. If you are convicted of any felony, control of Smith Corporate Empire automatically transfers to the Dickey estate. Which means, Barrett, that the moment those prosecutors arrest you, I own everything you've built." "You can't," Dorothy breathed from beside her husband. "I can," Angelica replied. "It's all in the contract your husband signed. The contract he clearly never read all the way through." Curtis stepped forward, pulling a folded document from his inner jacket pocket. "I've been holding on to this for 3 years, waiting for the day when Miss Dickey returned to claim what was hers. Your father gave it to me for safekeeping before he died, Barrett. He told me that if anything ever happened to him, I was to make sure this contract was honored." He handed the document to Angelica, who unfolded it carefully. Her father's signature was at the bottom, bold and confident. Above it was Barrett's, shaky and uncertain even 10 years ago. "You have 3 minutes, Silas said, checking his watch. "The prosecutors are getting impatient." Barrett looked around wildly, searching for any ally, any escape. But the ballroom that had been filled with his peers and partners minutes ago now felt hostile. No one wanted to be associated with a man about to be arrested for fraud. No one wanted to be photographed standing too close to scandal. "There is one thing I can do for you," Angelica said, and Barrett's head snapped up with hope. "I can make sure that every employee of Smith Corporate Empire keeps their job. I can ensure that the cleaning staff, the administrative assistants, the janitors, all the people you never bothered to notice are protected when this empire falls." "That's it?" Barrett asked desperately. "That's all you'll do?" "That's everything," Angelica corrected. "Because those people matter, Barrett. They're not invisible, they're not disposable. They're the real foundation of any company, and they deserve better than you ever gave them." The ballroom doors opened, and federal agents walked in, their badges out, their expressions professional, and unmoved by the opulence around them. "Barrett Smith," the lead agent said clearly, "you're under arrest for securities fraud, insider trading, and money laundering." As they handcuffed him and began reading his rights, Barrett looked at Angelica one last time. His expression held no remorse, only rage that his schemes had been discovered, that his empire was crumbling, that a woman he had overlooked was the one delivering his final judgment. Dorothy stood alone, abandoned by her friends, her husband being led away in handcuffs, her entire world disintegrating in the space of an hour. She looked at Angelica with something that might have been understanding, might have been respect, might have been simple exhaustion. "What happens now?" Dorothy asked quietly. Angelica smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "Now? Now we rebuild, but not for you." The federal agents led Barrett Smith through the ballroom, his handcuffed wrists held awkwardly in front of him, his head bowed in shame. The crowd parted silently, their phones still raised, documenting every moment of his fall. This would be front-page news by morning. The CEO, who had seemed untouchable, brought down in the most public way possible. Dorothy stood motionless, watching her husband disappear through the doors. When they closed behind him, she seemed to deflate, all the arrogance and cruelty draining out of her until she was just a woman in an expensive dress who had made catastrophic mistakes. She looked at Angelica one more time, opened her mouth as if to say something, then thought better of it. Without a word, she walked toward the exit, her heels clicking against the marble with none of their earlier confidence. The golden circle was already gone, having slipped away the moment the handcuffs came out. Fair-weather friends who only enjoyed the party when the weather was good. Caroline, Jessica, and Amanda would be on their phones by now, already spinning the story to make themselves look innocent, already distancing themselves from Dorothy's disgrace. By tomorrow, they would pretend they had never been friends at all. Angelica watched Dorothy leave, feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and emptiness. She had won. The woman who had mocked her, humiliated her, treated her as less than human was now fleeing in complete disgrace. But the victory felt hollow somehow, like it had come at a cost she hadn't fully calculated. Curtis stepped beside her. "That was well handled." "Was it?" Angelica asked. "I just destroyed a family." "You held them accountable," Curtis corrected. "There's a difference." Barrett destroyed himself with his greed and his crimes. Dorothy destroyed herself with her cruelty. You simply made sure they faced the consequences. Silas approached, his phone in hand. "The building is secure. The staff has been notified that there will be changes in leadership, but that their positions are safe. The board of directors is requesting an emergency meeting first thing Monday morning." "Tell them I'll be there," Angelica said. Around them, the gala guests were beginning to leave, the evening's entertainment having reached its dramatic conclusion. But some remained, lingering near the edges of the ballroom, watching Angelica with new eyes. She wasn't invisible anymore. She would never be invisible again. An older man approached, distinguished and gray-haired, wearing a tuxedo that probably cost more than a car. "Miss Dickey, I'm Robert Chen, chairman of Chen Industries. I knew your father. He was a remarkable man." "He was," Angelica agreed. "If you need any assistance navigating the transition, any advice on corporate restructuring or board management, I'd be honored to help. Your father helped me once many years ago. I never forgot it." Others came forward then, one by one, business leaders, investors, people who had known Marcus Dickey and respected what he had built. Each offered assistance, resources, connections. Some out of genuine loyalty to her father's memory, others because they recognized that a new power had emerged in the city, and they wanted to be on the right side of it. Angelica accepted their offers graciously, storing names and faces in her memory. This was how her father had operated, building networks of mutual obligation and respect, not through fear or violence, but through honor and kept promises. When the last of the guests had finally departed, Angelica stood alone in the empty ballroom, Curtis and Silas waited near the door, giving her space. The chandeliers still blazed overhead. The string quartet had long since packed up, and the staff was beginning to clean up the debris of the evening. She walked to the center of the room, to the spot where Dorothy had stood when her world began to crumble. Angelica had spent 3 years invisible, scrubbing these kinds of floors, keeping her head down, pretending to be someone she wasn't. She had thought that was safety, she had thought that was peace. But it had been a prison. A comfortable one perhaps, but a prison nonetheless. She had been hiding not just from the world, but from herself. From her responsibilities, her legacy, her power. Her father had raised her to be a leader, to carry on the Dickey family tradition of using power wisely and protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. And for 3 years she had abandoned that calling, letting people like Dorothy and Barrett prosper while good people suffered. Not anymore. Angelica pulled out her phone and dialed a number she had found in her father's papers. It rang twice before a woman answered. "Dickey Estate Management, this is Patricia speaking." "Patricia, this is Angelica Dickey. I need you to prepare the mansion. I'm coming home." There was a long pause, then a sound that might have been crying or laughing or both. "Miss Angelica, we've been waiting for you. We never stopped waiting." "I know," Angelica said softly, "and I'm sorry it took so long. But I'm ready now. Tomorrow morning I want a full accounting of all the family assets, all outstanding contracts, all debts owed to us and by us. I want to know exactly what my father left behind. Of course. Anything else?" Angelica looked around the ballroom one last time, at the space where she had been transformed from invisible janitor to visible heir, from nobody to somebody who mattered. "Yes," she said. "Find me a list of every cleaning company in the city. I want to make some acquisitions. It's time the people who actually do the work got paid what they're worth and treated with the dignity they deserve." She ended the call and walked toward where Curtis and Silas waited. The Mafia boss smiled slightly, approval in his eyes. "Your father would be proud," he said. "I hope so," Angelica replied, "because I'm just getting started." They walked out of the Sinclair Hotel together, leaving behind the world of casual cruelty and invisible people. Angelica Dickey had spent 3 years as a ghost, haunting the edges of other people's lives. But ghosts could return. Ghosts could reclaim what was taken from them. And sometimes ghosts could build something better than what existed before. The city stretched out before her, full of possibility and challenge. Somewhere out there, Dorothy was realizing that her life as she knew it was over. Barrett was sitting in a cell, coming to terms with his crimes. The Golden Circle was scrambling to protect their own reputations. But Angelica wasn't thinking about them anymore. She was thinking about the janitors who would come to work Monday morning at Smith Corporate Empire, wondering if they still had jobs. She was thinking about the cleaning staff who worked invisible shifts, ignored and undervalued. She was thinking about everyone who had ever been treated as less than human simply because of the work they did, or the color of their skin. Those were her people now. That was her responsibility. And she would honor it the way her father had taught her, with wisdom, with strength, and with the kind of power that didn't need to humiliate others to prove itself. Angelica Dickey was no longer invisible, and the city would never be the same. Okay, this story has come to an end. If it touched your heart in any way, leave a like and share it with someone who also enjoys emotional stories. New stories are coming soon. Until then, I'll be in the comments. Let's talk about this ending.